The same things that help you feel better can end up making things worse. It doesn't happen quickly, and it's not usually obvious when it's happening. And by the time you notice it isn't working the same way, you've already been relying on it. People find something that helps, a routine, a structure, a way of handling things that actually makes them feel more stable, and it works, so they keep doing it. They feel more like themselves and things feel more manageable. What doesn't get examined is what exactly it's working on. If it's stress, pressure building up that needs somewhere to go, having a structured way to handle it helps. But stress isn't the only thing that can make you feel like you're not okay. And when something else is going on, most people don't stop and ask whether what they're doing still makes sense. They assume the approach is fine and they just need to do it better. So things get tighter, the routine becomes more rigid, and they start holding themselves to it more strictly. And sometimes that helps. Sometimes consistency really is the issue, but sometimes it doesn't. And that's where it gets harder to tell what's actually going on. When the effort goes up and the results don't follow, the attention moves away from whether it's helping and onto whether you're doing it correctly. Are you being consistent enough? Are you following through? Are you actually committed to this? The question stops being, is this working? And becomes, what's wrong with how I'm doing it? And if what you're dealing with isn't just stress anymore, if it's closer to emotional distress or depression, focusing on doing it better tends to make things worse because you're trying to handle it like it's stress when it really isn't. And the gap between how hard you're trying and how you actually feel starts to look like evidence of personal failure. There's a version of this that's easy to miss. You keep doing what you're doing, you stay consistent, you follow through, and it doesn't land the same way. So you tighten up, and that's where it starts to work against you. Someone in that position can still look from the outside like they're doing everything right. They're keeping the routine, they're showing up, they're not falling apart in any visible way. But internally, what used to feel stabilizing now feels like one more thing they're struggling to keep up with. And the more that's true, the harder they often push because that's what they've learned to do when something isn't working. This connects to something from the last episode, the distinction between stress, distress, depression, and crisis. The kinds of things people do on their own, routines, habits, they tend to work well for stress. They can still help with emotional distress, but they're less reliable and they require more awareness about whether they're actually landing. With depression, the same approaches often don't produce the same results, and there's a real risk of reading that as a personal shortcoming rather than a signal about fit. And if someone is approaching crisis, continuing to treat it as something they should be able to manage on their own can delay them getting what they need. So the issue really isn't with the approaches themselves. A lot of them are genuinely useful. The issue is whether they're being applied to the right thing. Part of why people stay in this loop is that doing something, having a practice, a way of handling it, creates a sense of agency. And that feeling of agency matters. But it can also make it harder to step back and ask whether what you're doing is actually matched to what you're dealing with. Because stepping back feels like giving something up, even when what you're actually doing is getting more accurate about the situation. It doesn't feel dramatic when this is happening, and it shows up more as a different question. Not how do I do this better, but is this the right thing to be doing here? Sometimes that question brings you back to the same habits, just used a little differently or with less rigidity. And sometimes it points somewhere else, towards talking to someone or towards acknowledging that this is bigger than something you work through on your own. Neither of those is a failure. They're just different responses to different situations. If you've been doing the things you're supposed to do and it's not getting better, or it's getting harder to keep doing them, that's worth paying attention to. Not as evidence that you're doing anything wrong, but as information about what you might actually be dealing with. Because the goal isn't to manage it perfectly, it's to see it clearly enough that what you do next actually makes sense. This is uncommonly remarkable. Thanks for listening.